I never imagined that selling croissants from my home would lead to a war with the most vindictive woman in suburban Colorado. But here I was, standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning, staring at a cease-and-desist letter taped to my garage door while the smell of fresh sourdough wafted from my kitchen windows. The letter was from Patricia Moorehouse, president of the Meadowbrook Springs Homeowners Association, and it was 3 pages of legal threats printed on cream-colored cardstock that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. I pulled it down, careful not to tear it, and scanned the contents while my timer beeped inside, reminding me that my second batch of cinnamon rolls needed to come out of the oven. I had moved to Meadowbrook Springs 8 months ago, a planned community on the outskirts of Boulder with cookie-cutter houses painted in approved shades of beige and taupe. The neighborhood sat in a commercial dead zone, surrounded by empty lots that were supposed to become shopping centers but never materialized after the developer went bankrupt in 2023. The nearest grocery store was 4 miles away, and the closest coffee shop was even farther. When I bought the house, the realtor had assured me it was a quiet, peaceful community. What she failed to mention was that it was also a ghost town where nothing ever happened and nobody ever visited. I had started Sweet Haven Bakery from my kitchen 3 months after moving in, initially just selling to friends and taking special orders for birthdays and weddings. I had been a pastry chef at a high-end restaurant in Denver for 6 years before I got laid off when they restructured their kitchen staff. Rather than look for another restaurant job with brutal hours and mediocre pay, I decided to try going independent. I got my cottage food license, registered my business with the state, followed every food safety regulation to the letter, and started building a customer base through social media. What I did not anticipate was how popular it would become. Within 2 months, I had lines of customers coming to my house every Saturday and Sunday morning for fresh pastries, artisan breads, and custom cakes. People drove from Boulder, Louisville, and even as far as Fort Collins because my prices were reasonable and the quality was exceptional. I had worked too hard perfecting my recipes to sell anything less than perfect. The funny thing was, my customers did not just come to my house. They discovered that Meadowbrook Springs, despite being a residential wasteland, was actually a pleasant place to take a morning walk. The neighborhood had been designed with wide sidewalks, a small park with a pond, and several green spaces. People would pick up their pastries from me, then stroll around the neighborhood with their coffee and croissants, enjoying the scenery. Some of my regular customers started bringing their dogs. Others brought their kids to play in the park. The neighborhood finally had signs of life on the weekends, and I had assumed everyone would be happy about that. I was wrong. Patricia Moorehouse had moved into the neighborhood president role like a corporate hostile takeover. She was a woman in her late 40s with severely cut blonde hair that looked like it required a ruler and protractor to style, and she wore business casual clothes even on weekends, like she was perpetually ready for a board meeting. She had retired early from some executive position at a pharmaceutical company, and apparently decided that running an HOA would fill the power vacuum in her life. From what I had heard from my neighbors, she had implemented 17 new rules in the 6 months since she took over, including restrictions on what types of flowers you could plant, what hours you could run your sprinklers, and whether you could park in your own driveway overnight. I had met her exactly once, 2 weeks after I moved in, when she came by with a welcome basket that contained HOA bylaws, a list of approved exterior paint colors, and a passive-aggressive note about maintaining property values. She had smiled with too many teeth and told me that Meadowbrook Springs prided itself on being a quiet, dignified community. I had smiled back and thanked her for the basket, not yet realizing I was shaking hands with my future nemesis. The cease-and-desist letter demanded that I immediately stop all business operations from my residence, citing violations of HOA covenants that prohibited home-based businesses. It threatened daily fines of $500 and legal action if I did not comply within 72 hours. It also mentioned that she had filed a complaint with the county, though I knew that was an empty threat since my cottage food license was completely legal under Colorado law. I crumpled the letter slightly in my fist, then smoothed it back out. My cinnamon rolls were going to burn if I did not move, so I shoved the letter in my back pocket and headed inside. My kitchen was a comfortable chaos of flour dust, cooling racks, and the warm sweetness of baking bread. I had converted my formal dining room into a pickup area with a folding table and a cash register, and I had installed commercial-grade shelving to store my supplies. Everything was clean, organized, and up to code. I had checked and double-checked. I pulled the cinnamon rolls from the oven just in time, their cream cheese frosting melting into perfect white rivers down the sides. These were for the Hendersons, who had ordered 6 dozen for their daughter's soccer team fundraiser. I had another order for 2 dozen everything bagels, 3 sourdough loaves, and a custom birthday cake shaped like a dinosaur that had taken me 4 hours to sculpt yesterday. It was going to be a busy day, and I did not have time for Patricia's power trip. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Marcus, who lived 3 streets over. He was one of the few neighbors who had actually welcomed the bakery and had become a regular customer. "Dude, did you see the neighborhood Facebook group? Patricia is losing her mind about your bakery. She posted a whole manifesto." I wiped flour off my hands and opened Facebook. Sure enough, Patricia had posted a lengthy screed in the Meadowbrook Springs community group at 5:30 that morning. She had apparently been awake and furious while I was proofing my dough. The post was titled, "Illegal Business Threatening Our Community," and went on for paragraphs about how I was violating HOA rules, creating traffic problems, attracting undesirables, lowering property values, and generally destroying the peaceful nature of the neighborhood. She claimed that my customers were parking illegally, littering, making noise, and disturbing residents. She said she had received numerous complaints from concerned homeowners, and that the HOA board had voted unanimously to demand I cease operations immediately. I scrolled through the comments, which were a mixed bag. A few people had liked her post and agreed that home businesses were inappropriate for a residential neighborhood. But the majority of comments were actually defending me. People pointed out that the neighborhood had been dead before my bakery started bringing people in. Others mentioned that they enjoyed seeing families walking around on weekend mornings. Several people called out Patricia directly for overreaching and trying to control everything. One comment from a woman named Susan Martinez particularly stood out. "Patricia, I've lived here for 4 years, and this is the first time I've actually seen people enjoying the neighborhood. The bakery isn't hurting anyone. Maybe you should focus on actual problems like the broken street lights on Maple Drive that haven't worked in 6 months." I smiled at that. Susan was right. Patricia had spent months obsessing over decorative mailbox regulations, but had done nothing about actual infrastructure issues. Another comment from a guy named Robert Chen said, "I checked the HOA covenants. They say home-based businesses are prohibited, but there's an exception for businesses that don't create significant traffic or disturbance. Mike's Bakery is open by appointment only and customers come for pickup during reasonable hours. This seems like a gray area, not a violation." I had not even known about that exception, but Robert was an attorney who worked from home himself, so I trusted he had read the fine print. I made a mental note to look up the exact wording later. Patricia had responded to most of the dissenting comments with variations of "the rules are the rules. And if we allow one person to break the covenants, everyone will want to break them." She was clearly not interested in nuance or discussion. This was about control. I took a screenshot of the whole thread and texted it to my lawyer friend, Jamal, who had helped me set up my business paperwork. He responded within minutes. "She can't do this. Your cottage food license is protected by state law. HOAs can't override state regulations. If she keeps pushing, you can sue for harassment. Document everything." That made me feel slightly better, but I knew this was not going to be simple. Patricia did not strike me as someone who backed down easily, and she had the HOA's resources behind her. I had my savings, my stubbornness, and a growing number of supporters in the neighborhood, but I was not sure that would be enough. My first customers started arriving at 8. The Hendersons came for their cinnamon rolls, delighted with how they turned out. Then came a regular named Grace who bought a dozen blueberry muffins and 2 loaves of rosemary olive oil bread. She lingered at my door, looking concerned. "I saw Patricia's post," she said quietly. "She came to my house yesterday asking if your bakery had caused me any problems. She wanted me to sign a petition against you." My stomach dropped. "Did you sign it?" "God, no. I told her I loved having the bakery here and she should find something better to do with her time." Grace grinned. She didn't like that. She said I was being short-sighted and that property values were going to tank because of the increased traffic. I told her the only thing tanking property values was her attitude. I laughed despite myself. "I appreciate you standing up for me, I really do. Of course, you make the best bread I've ever had. If she shuts you down, I'll have to drive all the way to Boulder for decent sourdough, and I'm too lazy for that." She winked and headed back to her car, which was parked politely on the street in front of my house. The morning continued with a steady stream of customers. I had learned to stagger pickup times so there was never more than 2 or 3 people at my house at once, which kept things orderly and quiet. Nobody was blasting music or throwing parties. People came, picked up their baked goods, chatted for a few minutes, and left. It was as low impact as a home business could possibly be. Around 10, a silver Lexus pulled up, and Patricia herself emerged, wearing khaki pants and a navy blazer like she was about to attend a country club luncheon. She had a leather portfolio under one arm, and her expression was set in what I can only describe as determined smugness. I watched her approach through my front window, debating whether to pretend I was not home. But I had never been good at avoiding confrontation, so I opened the door before she could knock. "Patricia," I said evenly, "what can I do for you?" "Mr. Torres, I'm here on official HOA business." She did not wait for an invitation, just stepped forward like she expected me to move aside. I did not. We stood in my doorway in an awkward standoff. She frowned. "May I come in?" "I'd rather talk out here. I have orders in the oven." Her jaw tightened, but she composed herself quickly. "Fine. I assume you received the cease-and-desist notice I delivered this morning." "I did. And I assume you know that my bakery is completely legal under Colorado cottage food laws." State law does not supersede HOA covenants. When you purchased your home, you agreed to abide by our community rules. Those rules explicitly prohibit commercial businesses operated from residential properties. I crossed my arms. Robert Chen posted in the Facebook group that there's an exception for businesses that don't create significant disturbance. My bakery operates 2 days a week by appointment only. I'm not running a storefront, I'm not putting up signs, I'm not doing anything that affects my neighbors. Patricia's smile was sharp. Your customers create traffic congestion, noise, and parking issues. I've documented at least 15 vehicles parked on the street in front of your house last Saturday alone. Street parking is legal. People are allowed to park on public streets. Not when it creates a nuisance. She opened her portfolio and pulled out printed photographs. They showed my street with several cars parked along it, people walking on the sidewalk carrying bakery boxes, and one shot of a family letting their dog sniff the grass near the park entrance. This is not what residents signed up for when they moved here. I looked at the photos, genuinely confused. Patricia, these photos show people taking walks and parking legally. There's nothing wrong happening here. It's a disruption to the quiet enjoyment of the neighborhood, or it's people actually using the neighborhood for the first time since it was built. I could feel my frustration rising. Look, I understand you have rules to enforce, but I'm not doing anything harmful. My business brings people to the area who spend money at other local places too. They stop at the coffee truck on the corner, they visit the farmer's market at the community center. This is good for everyone. That's not the point. The point is that you are in violation of the covenants, and if I allow you to continue, it sets a precedent that anyone can ignore the rules. But the rules have exceptions. I meet those exceptions. She snapped her portfolio shut. The HOA board disagrees. You have 72 hours to cease operations or face daily fines. If you refuse to pay the fines, we can place a lien on your property. I suggest you take this seriously, Mr. Torres. She turned and walked back to her Lexus before I could respond. I stood in my doorway, watching her drive away, feeling a surge of anger and helplessness. This was not about rules or property values. This was about control. Patricia had decided I was a problem, and she was going to use every tool at her disposal to shut me down. I went back inside and immediately called Jamal. He answered on the second ring, already aware of the situation because I had forwarded him the cease-and-desist letter. She just showed up at my house trying to intimidate me, I said, pacing my kitchen. She's threatening liens and daily fines. Can she actually do that? Technically, yes. If the HOA board votes to impose fines and you don't pay them, they can eventually file a lien. But that's a long legal process and you have multiple defenses. First, your cottage food license is protected by state law, which supersedes HOA rules. Second, Colorado has specific statutes that limit HOA power over home-based businesses that don't create legitimate nuisances. Third, if you can prove that the HOA is selectively enforcing rules or acting in bad faith, you can countersue for harassment. What do I need to do? Document everything. Every interaction with Patricia, every customer complaint she claims to have, every fine notice she sends. Take photos of your setup to prove you're running a clean, professional operation. Get statements from neighbors supporting you, and if she actually tries to fine you, don't pay. Let her escalate it and we'll fight it in court if necessary. The judge will see that she's overreaching. I felt slightly reassured, but the thought of going to court made my stomach churn. I did not have money for a prolonged legal battle, and I suspected Patricia knew that. She was betting I would fold rather than fight, but she did not know me very well. I spent the afternoon fulfilling orders and documenting my business operations. I took photos of my kitchen, my appointment schedule, my food safety certifications, and my customer feedback. I printed out reviews from my social media pages, where people raved about my pastries and thanked me for bringing life to the neighborhood. I compiled everything into a folder, organized and professional. That evening, Marcus came over with beer and moral support. We sat on my back patio, watching the sun set over the empty fields behind the neighborhood. You know the ironic thing, Marcus said, taking a sip of his IPA. Patricia is the one who pushed for the community center renovation last year. She spent 6 months arguing that we needed to invest in amenities to attract people to the neighborhood. And now that people are actually coming here because of your bakery, she wants to shut you down. It makes no sense. It makes perfect sense if you understand that she just wants control, I said. She wants people to come on her terms, following her rules, doing what she decides is appropriate. I didn't ask her permission, so I'm a threat. She's going to lose this fight. Everyone loves your bakery. Everyone except her and her cronies on the board. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Actually, I don't think the whole board is on her side. I know Dave Epstein, the treasurer. He's a reasonable guy. He told me at a community event last month that he thought the HOA was getting too restrictive. Maybe you could talk to him, get a sense of whether the board actually voted to go after you or if Patricia is just making that up. That was a good idea. If Patricia was acting unilaterally, it would undermine her authority and give me leverage. I made a note to reach out to Dave. Over the next 2 days, I continued operating as normal while also preparing for a fight. I contacted every customer I could and asked if they would be willing to provide a statement supporting the bakery. The response was overwhelming. People sent me paragraphs about how much they loved Sweet Haven, how convenient it was, how it had become a weekend tradition for their families. Several people mentioned that they had started exploring the neighborhood because of my bakery and had discovered how nice it was. A few even said they were considering moving to Meadowbrook Springs, specifically because of the community atmosphere my business had helped create. I compiled all of these testimonials into a document and sent it to Jamal, who added it to the case file he was building. On the third day, exactly 72 hours after Patricia's initial cease and desist, another letter appeared on my door. This one was a formal notice of violation and fine. It stated that I had failed to comply with the HOA's demand to cease business operations and was therefore subject to a fine of $500 per day, effective immediately. It also stated that I had 10 days to appeal the fine to the HOA board, after which it would become permanent and subject to collection. I read the letter twice, feeling my blood pressure rise. $500 a day. That was $15,000 a month. Even if I fought it and won, the stress and distraction would be unbearable. I took a photo of the letter and sent it to Jamal with a simple message. "She's escalating." He called me within minutes. "Okay, this is actually good for us. She's moving fast, which means she's not being careful. File an appeal immediately. I'll help you write it. We're going to request a hearing in front of the full board and we're going to bring every supporter you have. We're going to turn this into a PR nightmare for her. You think that will work?" I think Patricia thrives on control and hates being challenged publicly. If we force her to defend her position in front of the community, she's either going to back down or reveal just how unreasonable she's being. Either way, we win. I liked the sound of that. I spent the next day crafting my appeal with Jamal's help. It was a detailed, professional document that outlined my legal right to operate under Colorado cottage food laws, the measures I had taken to minimize any impact on the neighborhood, and the overwhelming community support for my business. I included testimonials, photos, and a point-by-point rebuttal of Patricia's claims. I requested a public hearing so that all residents could attend and voice their opinions. I submitted the appeal through the HOA's online portal and emailed a copy directly to every board member I could find contact information for. Then I posted in the neighborhood Facebook group, politely informing everyone that I had appealed the HOA's decision and that there would be a public hearing. I invited anyone who supported the bakery to attend. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of people commented saying they would be there. Some people who had never even been customers said they supported my right to run a legal business. A few people started a separate thread organizing a petition in support of Sweet Haven Bakery. Within 24 hours, over 100 residents had signed it. Patricia, predictably, was furious. She posted a response saying that the appeal hearing was an internal HOA matter and that outside interference was inappropriate. She claimed that the board would make its decision based on the covenants, not popular opinion. But the damage was done. The narrative had shifted from rule-breaking business owner to tyrannical HOA president vs. beloved local baker. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at 7, to be held in the community center's main room. I spent the week preparing my presentation, organizing my evidence, and trying not to stress-bake myself into bankruptcy. My regular customers continued to support me, and several people even increased their orders as a show of solidarity. One woman bought 10 loaves of bread just to donate to a local food bank in my name. It was humbling and motivating at the same time. Thursday arrived with unseasonably warm weather for October in Colorado. The community center was a modern building at the edge of the neighborhood, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a meeting room that could hold about 75 people. When I arrived at 6:30, there were already at least 50 people milling around outside. Marcus waved me over to where he was standing with a group of neighbors I recognized as regular customers. "You've got a whole army here, man," he said, grinning. "Patricia's going to lose her mind when she sees this turnout. I just hope it makes a difference." It will. The board members are elected. They're not going to side with Patricia if it means alienating half the neighborhood. I hoped he was right. At 7 sharp, the board members filed in and took their seats at a long table at the front of the room. Patricia sat in the center, flanked by 4 other members. Dave Epstein, the treasurer I had heard was reasonable, Margaret Liu, the secretary, Tom Bradley, a retired engineer, and Jennifer Walsh, a younger woman who had recently joined the board. The room was packed, with every seat filled and people standing along the walls. I sat in the front row with Jamal beside me, my folder of evidence on my lap. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp crack of her gavel. She looked out at the crowd with barely concealed irritation. "This is an appeal hearing for Michael Torres regarding violations of HOA covenants related to operating a commercial business from his residence. This is not a community forum, only Mr. Torres and the board will speak unless the board requests additional input. I expect everyone to remain quiet and orderly." There were a few murmurs of dissent, but people settled down. Patricia nodded, satisfied, and turned her attention to me. "Mr. Torres, you have 15 minutes to present your appeal." I stood up, taking my folder with me, and approached the microphone that had been set up facing the board. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Thank you for hearing my appeal. I'm here tonight because I believe the HOA's decision to fine me for operating Sweet Haven Bakery is not only unjust, but also legally indefensible and harmful to our community." Patricia's expression remained neutral, but I saw Tom Bradley lean forward with interest. I continued, "I operate a licensed cottage food business in full compliance with Colorado state law. I have all necessary permits, I follow all food safety regulations, and I maintain a professional, clean operation. Colorado cottage food laws specifically protect my right to operate this type of business from my home, and state law supersedes HOA covenants." I pulled out copies of the relevant statutes and handed them to Jamal, who passed them to the board. Patricia barely glanced at them. "Second, the HOA covenant regarding home-based businesses includes an exception for businesses that do not create significant traffic, noise, or disturbance. My bakery operates by appointment only 2 days per week during reasonable hours. I have a staggered schedule to prevent congestion. My customers park legally on public streets. There is no noise, no signage, no storefront activity. I am well within the spirit and letter of the exception." I pulled out my appointment logs and photos of my operation and passed those forward as well. Third, the claim that my bakery is harming the neighborhood is simply false. I have over 100 testimonials from residents who say that my bakery has improved the community. People are visiting the neighborhood, enjoying our parks and sidewalks, and supporting other local businesses. Property values are not decreasing, they're increasing because Meadowbrook Springs is becoming a destination rather than a forgotten subdivision. I handed over the stack of testimonials. Margaret Liu took them and started reading immediately, her eyebrows rising. Finally, I believe this enforcement action is being selectively applied and motivated by personal bias rather than legitimate concerns. Other residents operate home-based businesses, including online retail, consulting services, and tutoring, without any interference from the HOA. I'm being targeted because my business is visible and because it's successful. That's not fair and it's not legal. I paused, looking at each board member in turn. Dave Epstein was nodding slightly. Margaret was still reading the testimonials. Tom looked thoughtful. Jennifer was watching Patricia, trying to gauge her reaction. Patricia herself looked like she was carved from ice. I'm asking the board to reverse the violation notice and fines, to recognize that Sweet Haven Bakery is a legal, beneficial business that complies with all applicable laws and HOA covenants. Thank you. I returned to my seat. Jamal gave me a subtle thumbs up. Patricia cleared her throat. Thank you, Mr. Torres. The board will now discuss the matter. But before she could continue, Dave Epstein spoke up. Actually, Patricia, I think we should hear from some of the residents who are here. This clearly affects the whole community, and we should consider their input. Patricia's eyes flashed. That's not the procedure for an appeal hearing, Dave. Maybe not, but we have the authority to modify procedure if the board agrees. I move that we open the floor for community comment. I second, Margaret said immediately, looking up from the testimonials. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but she was outnumbered. Fine, 10 minutes of community comment, keep it brief. Hands shot up all over the room. Margaret started calling on people. The first to speak was Grace, the woman who bought my rosemary olive oil bread every week. I've lived here for 3 years, and this is the best thing that's happened to the neighborhood. Mike's Bakery doesn't bother anyone. It brings people together. If anything, the HOA should be supporting him, not attacking him. Next was Robert Chen, the attorney who had defended me in the Facebook group. I've reviewed the covenants extensively. Mike is correct that there's an exception for low-impact home businesses. His operation clearly qualifies. Furthermore, Colorado Statute 38 to 33.3 to 106 limits HOA authority over businesses that comply with state licensing. This fine is legally questionable at best. Susan Martinez, who had called out Patricia on Facebook, stood up without waiting to be called on. I'm tired of this board acting like we're living in some kind of dictatorship. Mike's Bakery is good for us. The only person complaining is Patricia, and she needs to get over herself. There were murmurs of agreement, and Patricia's face flushed red. That's enough personal attacks. Next speaker. Several more people spoke, all in support of the bakery. A few mentioned specific instances of enjoying the increased foot traffic. One elderly man said that seeing families walk past his house on weekend mornings made him feel less isolated. A young mother said my bakery had become a special tradition for her and her daughter. Then a woman I did not recognize stood up. She was probably in her 50s, well-dressed, with an expression of concern. I'd like to offer a different perspective. I live 2 houses down from Mr. Torres, and while I appreciate that many people enjoy his bakery, I have noticed increased noise and activity on weekend mornings. I moved here for peace and quiet, and that's been disrupted. Patricia looked triumphant. Thank you, Diane. It's important to hear from those who are negatively affected. But Diane was not finished. That said, I don't think the disruption rises to the level of requiring him to shut down. Maybe we could work out a compromise, limit his hours, or require customers to park in a specific area. I don't think we need to destroy his business over this. Patricia's triumph faded. Even the one person who had a complaint was not fully on her side. After a few more speakers, Margaret called time. Patricia looked relieved to regain control. The board will now deliberate. Mr. Torres, please step outside while we discuss. Jamal and I went out into the hallway, followed by most of the crowd. People clustered around me, offering encouragement and reassurance. Marcus handed me a bottle of water. You crushed it in there, he said. There's no way they're going to uphold the fines. I hope you're right. We waited for nearly 30 minutes, which felt like hours. I could hear raised voices from inside the meeting room, though I could not make out words. Finally, the door opened and Margaret beckoned us back in. The room settled quickly. Patricia looked angry but composed. Dave looked satisfied. The others were neutral. Patricia spoke in a clipped, formal tone. The board has reviewed the appeal and deliberated. By a vote of 4-1, the board has decided to reverse the violation notice and dismiss the fines. Relief flooded through me. I heard scattered applause from the audience. Patricia continued, clearly forcing out the words. However, the board is implementing new guidelines for home-based businesses in Meadowbrook Springs. All home businesses must register with the HOA, provide proof of appropriate licensing, and adhere to specific hours of operation and traffic management protocols. Mr. Torres, you will be required to submit a business plan and operational details for approval within 30 days. I could live with that. It was a compromise, and while it gave Patricia some of the control she craved, it also legitimized my business. Thank you, I said. I'll submit everything you need. Dave spoke up. For the record, I want to note that Mr. Torres has been operating responsibly and legally. These new guidelines should not be used as a backdoor way to shut down compliant businesses. We're implementing them to create clarity, not to create obstacles. Patricia shot him a look, but she did not argue. The meeting was adjourned and people filed out, many stopping to congratulate me or shake my hand. I felt like I had just won a prize fight. Jamal clapped me on the shoulder. That went as well as we could have hoped. Patricia tried to save face with the new guidelines, but she lost the important battle. Your bakery is safe. For now, I said. She's not going to let this go. Probably not, but you've got the community on your side now. That's powerful. Over the next few weeks, I submitted my business plan to the HOA as required. It was a formality, really. Just documentation of what I was already doing. The board approved it without incident, though Patricia made sure to add a note that I would be subject to periodic inspections to ensure compliance. I did not care. I had nothing to hide. The bakery continued to thrive. If anything, the controversy had increased my visibility and customer base. People who had never heard of me before learned about Sweet Haven through the neighborhood drama and decided to check it out. I started getting orders from surrounding neighborhoods and even from people in Denver who were willing to make the drive for my sourdough and pastries. The increased foot traffic in Meadowbrook Springs had a ripple effect. A food truck that sold coffee and breakfast sandwiches started parking near the community center on weekend mornings, capitalizing on the crowd my bakery drew. A local artist set up a booth selling handmade crafts. The farmers market that had been struggling started seeing better attendance. The neighborhood was coming alive. Patricia, predictably, was not happy about any of this. She continued to post in the Facebook group about maintaining community standards and preventing commercialization. But her posts got less and less engagement. People were tired of her negativity. A few residents even started a petition to recall her from the board, though it did not gain enough traction to succeed. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. In early November, I started noticing strange things. One morning, I found my garbage cans knocked over and trash scattered across my driveway. I assumed it was raccoons until it happened 3 days in a row. Then I found a nail in my tire. Then someone spray-painted "No businesses" on my garage door in sloppy red letters. I had to spend an entire Saturday repainting it. I installed a security camera system, something I should have done months ago. 2 days later, the cameras caught Patricia's silver Lexus driving slowly past my house at 3 in the morning. She did not do anything, just drove by and left, but it was unsettling. Was she casing my house, trying to catch me violating some rule? I mentioned it to Jamal, who advised me to keep recording everything but not to confront her unless she actually did something clearly illegal. The harassment continued in small ways. I received multiple noise complaints filed with the HOA, claiming I was operating power tools at unreasonable hours. None of them were true. I got a citation for having a commercial vehicle parked in my driveway, even though my van was a personal vehicle that I used for deliveries and was clearly allowed under HOA rules. Each citation was dismissed when I provided evidence, but it was exhausting and distracting. Then, in mid-November, things escalated dramatically. I arrived home one afternoon after making a delivery to find 2 sheriff's deputies waiting in my driveway. My heart sank. This could not be good. "Michael Torres," one of them asked. "Yes, that's me. What's going on?" "We received a report of a possible health code violation at this address. Are you operating a food service business from this residence?" "I have a licensed cottage food business, yes. Everything is legal and up to code." The deputy nodded. "We're going to need to come inside and inspect the premises. We've been told there are concerns about food safety and sanitation." I knew my rights. "Do you have a warrant?" "No, but if you refuse to allow an inspection, we can obtain one and you may face additional penalties." I considered my options. I knew my kitchen was spotless and compliant. If I refused, it would look like I had something to hide. If I let them in and they found nothing wrong, it would vindicate me and expose whoever had filed the false report. "Come in," I said. "I've got nothing to hide." I led them inside. They were professional and courteous, taking photos and notes as they examined my kitchen, my storage areas, and my records. I showed them my cottage food license, my food handler's certification, and my logs documenting cleaning and temperature monitoring. After about 45 minutes, they seemed satisfied. "Everything looks good, Mr. Torres," the first deputy said. "Your operation is clean and well organized. We'll note that in our report. Can I ask who filed the complaint?" He hesitated, then said, "It was anonymous, but the report came through your homeowners association. They claimed multiple residents had reported illness after consuming your products." My stomach dropped. That was a serious accusation, and it was completely false. I've never had a single complaint about food safety. I've been doing this for months and I have hundreds of satisfied customers. This is a false report. We're not disputing that, sir. Based on what we've seen, there's no validity to the complaint. But we have to investigate every report we receive. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, shaking with anger. Patricia had escalated from petty harassment to filing false reports with law enforcement. This was not just annoying anymore. This was potentially criminal. I called Jamal immediately. She filed a false report claiming my bakery is making people sick. The sheriff came out and inspected everything. They found nothing wrong, but this is slander. This could destroy my business if word gets out. Did the deputies say the report came from Patricia specifically? They said it came through the HOA and was anonymous. Okay, here's what we do. We file a formal complaint with the HOA board alleging harassment and abuse of power. We demand an investigation into who filed the false report. And if we can prove it was Patricia, we file a defamation lawsuit and possibly pursue criminal charges for filing a false police report. This is serious, Mike. She crossed a line. I spent the rest of the evening documenting everything. The vandalism, the false citations, the deputy's visit, all of it. I compiled it into a formal complaint, and submitted it to the HOA board, copying every member individually. I also posted a carefully worded statement in the neighborhood Facebook group explaining that an anonymous false report had been filed against my bakery, that law enforcement had investigated and found no violations, and that I was pursuing legal action against whoever was responsible for the false accusations. The neighborhood exploded. People were outraged. Comments poured in expressing support and demanding accountability. Several people directly accused Patricia, pointing out the timing and her obvious vendetta. Others called for her resignation. Patricia responded with a post claiming she had nothing to do with any reports and that she was the victim of a smear campaign. But her credibility was shot. Even people who had previously stayed neutral were turning against her. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following week. I planned to attend and demand answers. But before that meeting could happen, something unexpected occurred. Dave Epstein, the board treasurer, reached out to me via email and asked if we could meet privately. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Boulder, away from the neighborhood. Dave was a pleasant man in his early 60s with graying hair and a calm demeanor. He ordered a black coffee and got straight to the point. "Mike, I want to be upfront with you. Patricia filed that report. She did it without the board's knowledge or approval, and she used HOA letterhead to make it seem official. When the rest of us found out, we were furious." I sat back, processing that. "How did you find out?" Margaret did some digging. She accessed the HOA's official email account and found the correspondence with the county health department. Patricia sent it from her personal email, but identified herself as HOA president, and implied she was acting on behalf of the board. It's a serious abuse of her position. "What are you going to do about it?" "The board is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow night to address it. We're recommending her removal as president and possible expulsion from the board entirely. But I wanted to talk to you first because this is going to get ugly. Patricia is not going to go quietly, and you're going to be dragged further into this. I want to make sure you're prepared. I appreciate the warning. Honestly, I just want this to stop. I want to run my bakery and live my life without constant harassment." Dave nodded. "I understand, and I want you to know that the majority of the board supports you. Patricia's behavior has been erratic and authoritarian for months, and this was the final straw. We should have reined her in sooner. I'm sorry you had to deal with this." The emergency board meeting was held the next evening, and it was packed with even more residents than the appeal hearing. The tension in the room was palpable. Patricia sat at the board table looking defiant, her arms crossed, her expression tight. Dave called the meeting to order. "We're here tonight to address serious allegations regarding the conduct of our board president, Patricia Moorehouse. Specifically, allegations that she filed a false report with law enforcement using HOA authority without board approval." He laid out the evidence methodically. The email correspondence, the timeline, Patricia's use of HOA letterhead. Margaret provided additional documentation showing that Patricia had violated multiple board policies and bylaws in her actions. Patricia tried to defend herself, claiming she was acting in the community's interest and that she had legitimate concerns about the bakery's safety. But her arguments were flimsy and contradicted by the deputy's report, which Dave had obtained and entered into the record. The board voted 4-0, with Patricia abstaining, to remove her as president effective immediately. Then they voted again, 4-0, to expel her from the board entirely for abuse of power and misrepresentation. Patricia stood up, her face flushed, her voice shaking. "This is a witch hunt. You're all turning on me because I'm the only one willing to enforce the rules. This neighborhood is going to fall apart without leadership." "We have leadership," Dave said calmly. "We just don't need a tyrant." Patricia grabbed her things and stormed out, The room erupted in applause. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to thank me for standing my ground and exposing Patricia's behavior. It was vindicating, but also exhausting. I just wanted to go home and bake bread. Marcus drove me home, sensing I needed a friend. We sat in my kitchen, drinking beer in comfortable silence. "You think she's done?" he asked. "I hope so. But I'm keeping my security cameras running just in case." For a few weeks, things were quiet. The bakery continued to operate smoothly. The neighborhood settled into a new normal without Patricia's constant interference. Dave was elected interim president, and the board started working on revising the HOA bylaws to prevent future abuses of power. I thought the drama was over. And then, in early December, Patricia was arrested. I found out through the neighborhood Facebook group, where someone posted a news article link with the headline "Former HOA President Charged with Vandalism and Filing False Reports." Apparently, after her removal from the board, Patricia had continued her harassment campaign. She had vandalized several other residents' properties, including spray painting cars and slashing tires. She had also filed multiple false police reports against people she perceived as enemies. One of her victims had installed security cameras, just like I had, and caught her in the act. The police had investigated, connected the dots to her pattern of behavior, and arrested her. She was charged with multiple counts of vandalism, filing false police reports, and harassment. The article mentioned my bakery case as one of several incidents demonstrating her pattern of conduct. I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that she would not be bothering me anymore, sadness that someone had spiraled so far out of control, and a little bit of vindication that justice was being served. The case moved through the court system over the next few months. Patricia initially tried to fight the charges, claiming she was being persecuted for upholding community standards. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. Security footage, email records, witness testimony. In February, she accepted a plea deal that included probation, restitution to her victims, community service, and mandatory counseling. She was also required to stay away from Meadowbrook Springs and could not hold any position in any homeowners association. By that point, Sweet Haven Bakery was thriving beyond anything I had imagined. I had hired an assistant to help with the increased volume of orders. I was getting inquiries about wholesale accounts from local coffee shops and restaurants. I had even been featured in a Denver food blog as one of the best hidden gem bakeries in the area. The neighborhood itself had transformed. The increased foot traffic from my bakery had attracted other small businesses. A woman opened a small plant nursery in her garage, operating under the same cottage business rules I had fought for. A retired teacher started offering art classes in the community center. The farmers' market expanded to twice a month and drew vendors from all over the region. Meadowbrook Springs was no longer a forgotten subdivision. It was a vibrant community. In March, the HOA board officially recognized Sweet Haven Bakery as a community asset and passed a resolution thanking me for my contributions to the neighborhood. It was a symbolic gesture, but it meant something. I had gone from being threatened with fines and legal action to being celebrated. Dave stopped by one Saturday morning to pick up his usual order of sourdough and bagels. He lingered at the door, watching the line of customers snaking down my sidewalk. "You know, when you first moved in, this neighborhood was dying," he said. The developer had abandoned the commercial projects, property values were stagnant, people were leaving. Patricia thought the answer was tighter control and stricter rules, but you proved that what we needed was life, activity, people actually using the space. You saved this place, Mike. "I just wanted to bake bread," I said, smiling. "Sometimes that's enough." He was right. Sometimes doing what you love and doing it well is enough to change everything. As the weather warmed and spring arrived in Colorado, I started thinking about expansion. I had been operating out of my home kitchen for a year now, and while it worked, I was reaching the limits of what I could do in that space. I started researching commercial kitchen rentals and potential storefronts. Maybe it was time to take Sweet Haven Bakery to the next level. But no matter where the business went, I would never forget the fight I had to wage just to be allowed to do what I loved. The harassment, the false accusations, the legal battles. It had been exhausting and stressful and infuriating, but it had also taught me something important. Standing up for yourself matters. Not backing down when someone tries to intimidate you matters. And community matters more than anything. Patricia had tried to force me out because my bakery did not fit her vision of what the neighborhood should be. She had wielded rules and regulations like weapons, not caring about the human cost of her crusade for control. But in the end, the community had rejected her vision and embraced mine. Not because I was special, but because I was offering something people wanted, something that made their lives a little better, a little sweeter. And that, more than any legal victory or business success, was what mattered most. On a warm Saturday morning in late March, I stood in my kitchen pulling fresh croissants from the oven, the sun streaming through the windows, and I could hear the sounds of families walking past my house, laughing and talking, on their way to the park. My assistant, Jenny, was boxing up orders at the front counter. My phone buzzed with new orders coming in for next weekend. The smell of butter and vanilla and yeast filled the air. This was what I had fought for, not just the right to run a business, but the right to be part of something bigger, to contribute to a community, to make something with my own hands that brought people joy. Patricia had tried to take that away from me, driven by her need for control and her narrow vision of what a neighborhood should be. She had seen my success as a threat, my customers as a nuisance, my bakery as a violation. But she had been wrong about everything. And now she was gone, and Sweet Haven Bakery was still here, stronger than ever, bringing people together every weekend. The neighborhood she had tried so hard to control had rejected her authoritarianism and embraced the messy, chaotic, beautiful reality of actual community. I had won. Not just in court or in HOA meetings, but in the way that really mattered. My business was thriving, my neighbors were happy, and the neighborhood was alive in a way it had never been before. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is just living well, doing what you love, and proving the haters wrong by succeeding despite them. As I watched another customer walk away with a box of my pastries, smiling like they had just received a gift, I realized something. Patricia had done me a favor in a twisted way. Her persecution had galvanized the community, brought my supporters together, and given Sweet Haven Bakery a story that made it more than just a business. It was now a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny, a testament to the power of community over control, and proof that sometimes the best way to fight oppressive rules is simply to stand your ground and refuse to be bullied. The next chapter of Sweet Haven Bakery would be even bigger and better. But I would never forget how it started, with a cease-and-desist letter taped to my garage door and a choice: back down or fight back. I had chosen to fight, and I had won. And every weekend, as customers lined up at my door and families walked through the neighborhood enjoying their pastries, I was reminded of why that fight had been worth it. Not for me, but for everyone who believed that communities should be about bringing people together, not keeping them apart. For everyone who thought that rules should serve people, not control them. For everyone who believed that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply making really good croissants and refusing to apologize for it. Patricia Moorehouse had tried to force me out, convinced that my bakery was destroying the neighborhood. But she had failed to understand the most important thing: My bakery did not bring in just foot traffic. It brought in life, joy, community, and connection. And those things are worth fighting for, no matter how hard the battle gets. As spring turned to summer, Sweet Haven Bakery became a permanent fixture of Meadowbrook Springs, woven into the fabric of the community in a way that no HOA rule could ever undo. And every time I pulled a fresh batch of bread from the oven, I remembered Patricia's threats and smiled, knowing that I had not just survived her attempts to shut me down. I had thrived despite them, and in doing so had helped transform an entire neighborhood from a sterile, controlled subdivision into a real, living community. That was worth more than any victory in court. That was legacy.